Greetings to all. Our today's guest, Ed Steer. He was attorney in the U.S. for the first 17 years of his career. He was a prosecutor specializing in organized crime and corruption. For the past 40 years, he has investigated criminal behavior, much which was done on behalf of the U.S. Department of Justice. Mr. Steer, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Mr. Steer, as a result of 60 years' experience dealing with criminals, especially members of organized crime, you have become an expert on the mind of the psychopath, and you have had to understand how they think and what motivates their behavior. So today, we'll talk about terrorist Putin. Dr. Vlad Bilavsky said, "When I look at Vladimir Putin as a psychologist, I see a clear demonstration of what we call the dark triad. It is a combination of three personality traits: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism." Let's start with psychopathy. Do you agree that Putin is mentally ill, but he has been mentally ill as a psychopath since childhood?
Well, you have to understand that psychiatrists don't recognize psychopathy as a mental illness. And the reason is because they can't do anything about it. There's no medication. There's no psychoanalysis. There is nothing that they can do to cure a psychopath or even to mitigate a psychopath's behavior. And so that's why there are so many psychopaths that go untreated. That's why psychopaths are so dangerous, because our science has never been able to find a way to control their behavior. The only way to control their behavior is for people to understand them and to deal with them through the criminal justice system or in some other way.
Mr. Steve, we're talking about Machiavellianism. We see manipulative behavior, including lying and deception in pursuit of goals. We can see this in Putin when he lies openly about everything. He not only deceives, but also changes the goals of his specially military operation. But we understand that this war, when it doesn't go according to plan. What do you think about Machiavellian approach to politics with regard to his realism? How it affects on Russians? How it affects Russians? How do you think?
Well, all psychopaths are manipulative. What you referred to as Machiavellian behavior. That's part of the cluster of symptoms of a psychopath. So they're all manipulative. They all try to take advantage of other people. And let me explain to you what causes a person to be a psychopath, because then things will become clearer. A psychopath has no emotions. You and I feel love, empathy, fear. They feel none of that. And so a psychopath, as a child, has a feeling of emptiness. They have no feelings of affection. They can't relate to other people. They feel empty inside. And so they learn at a very early age to fill it with a couple of forms of behavior that tend to give them some kind of satisfaction. We really don't understand how that satisfaction works inside, but they're all drawn to the same thing. And that satisfaction comes from manipulating and hurting other people. Starts out in young children, in many cases, as hurting small animals. They tend not to have friendships. They tend to be loners because they can't relate to other people, because most of our relationships are based on emotion and they don't feel any emotion. And so they start out trying to manipulate and control others, typically through inflicting pain, but sometimes through manipulation of the emotions of normal people. They're very good at it because they don't feel any emotions, and so they can sense our feelings and they can exploit us. And this is true whether it's in an individual relationship or as a political leader. The fact that they feel no fear means that they have no conscience. What keeps you and I from lying is something we learn at a very early age based on our emotions. We're taught that if we lie, it's wrong, and we feel fear. They feel none of that. So they can't make a distinction between the truth or a lie. And they tell lies just as easily as they state the truth. If you put a psychopath on a lie detector, they show no reactions. Lie detector doesn't work with psychopaths because there's no response to the fact that they're lying. So when you think about a psychopath in that way, and you look at Putin's behavior, it becomes clear that he has the capacity to manipulate other people because he has no emotions himself, and he can sense and exploit the emotional weaknesses of other people. He has no hesitation to lie because he can't even make a distinction in his own mind between a lie and the truth because he has no conscience. And so it becomes extremely difficult to deal with people like that because all of us, when I say all of us, I'm talking about people with normal emotions, all of us cannot imagine what it's like to exist in this world with no feelings of love, empathy, sympathy for other people, remorse. I mean, think about what Putin did when he removed Prigozhin as a problem for himself.
Mr. Steer.
He blew up an airplane with a group of people on it without any hesitation at all. Solved his problem instantly. But he must have manipulated Prigozhin into believing that he would be safe on that airplane.
Mr. Steer, can we...
He removed Alexei Navalny, killed Alexei Navalny simply to remove him as a factor in the negotiation for the release of prisoners between Russia and the West. Didn't want to negotiate over Navalny because he was too much of a threat and simply took him off the table by killing him.
Mr. Steer, can we say that psychopaths believe what they're doing is moral and good in their own personal world? With them, you can't use morality as an argument.
They have no sense of morality. It's what satisfies them personally, what fills this emptiness inside them. I mean, I've dealt with professional murderers who, in describing murders that they committed many years before, enjoyed the experience all over again by describing it. They relived the experience of committing the murder. It's what fills them with a sense of something like emotions. We don't completely understand it, but it is what gives them a sense of some kind of stimulation. There's one other thing I should mention about psychopaths, and that is they're attracted to risk, because you and I are risk averse because we fear the consequences. A psychopath has no fear of those consequences because they don't experience fear. And so they'll go further than a normal person will. in creating circumstances where they or people that they represent are at risk without hesitation, because the risk doesn't mean anything to them.
But as I think, Mr. Steer, that psychopaths are very good at reading other people's emotions and intentions, even though they don't feel anything themselves, right?
Yes, that's very, very true. They sense our weaknesses. They probe. If you're dealing with a psychopath, people encounter psychopaths on two levels. One is in personal relationships, and it can be somebody that you work with. It can be somebody that you work for. It can be a lover. We encounter psychopaths in our lives on a fairly regular basis. They're always reading us. They're testing us. They're probing to find our weaknesses. And if you betray a weakness because it's part of your makeup, they exploit it. If you have any fears, they exploit those fears.
If we're talking about Putin, next it can be narcissism. Can we conclude that in Putin we have seen this kind of behavior when he tried to compensate for his weaknesses with hyper-masculine actions, as we see on, for example, on this photo?
Well, yeah.
For example,
I'm sorry.
He has been photographed and filmed riding horses, bare-chested, or flying a microlight, or diving, for example, and so on and so on.
Well, I think that this is all part of his way of trying to display masculine qualities that he thinks will make him more acceptable to the Russian people, more acceptable as a leader of the Russian people. But I think that the real measure of Putin's psychopathy is the way he envisions himself as a new czar. All psychopaths have not just narcissistic characteristics, but a sense of grandiosity, a sense that there's nothing that they can't do. They want to get bigger, more important, more powerful than anybody who's come before them. That's part of what drives a psychopath. Whether you're a mafia leader or a political leader or you're a serial killer, you want to be bigger, better, more successful at whatever it is you're doing, as perverse as that is, than anybody who's come before you. And that's why when people say that Putin views himself as a modern czar, that's probably very, very true. He wants to create a new Russian empire for his own personal satisfaction. Has nothing to do with the Russian people. Mm. The Russian people are simply a vehicle by which he can satisfy his own grandiose objectives. And these pictures of him bare-chested and riding horses and doing all sorts of other masculine things are just what he thinks is going to attract the support and attention of the Russian people so that he can achieve his goal, which is to create a Russian empire. All you have to do is look at the video of Putin walking through the Kremlin and looking at those guards dressed up in their costumes who salute and turn their heads as he walks past them, it's a throwback to centuries ago, as he envisions himself as a czar, as Peter the Great, or one of the other historical figures in Russia, walking through the Kremlin, being recognized by his guards.
Another thing Dr. Vlad Bilavsky have noticed is his lack of his strategic thinking. He has very tactical thinking. It is not strategic at all. Do you agree with thought that this results from his background in the KGB, because their agents were not supposed to make long-term plans or create long-term strategies, as political leaders must do to build an economy or foreign policy, and KGB agents generally perform tactical tasks aimed at protecting the Soviet regime, such as protecting the leader of the Communist Party, identifying dissidents, and assassinating or silencing anyone with opposing views?
I see it differently. Psychopaths are typically, and this is their vulnerability, typically short-term thinkers. They are not strategic thinkers because they feel like they don't have to think strategically. They think about the next tactical move. They believe that they can outsmart everybody without thinking long-term about how to do it. So I think that people like Vladimir Putin and other psychopaths are recruited by an organization like the KGB, not taught to be short-term thinkers, but because they have the qualities that the KGB is looking for, that includes short-term thinking. They're fully capable of committing brutal crimes. They're fully capable of manipulating people. They're fully capable of assessing weaknesses in other people. And those are the very qualities that they're looking for in KGB agents. And so, but as I said before, short-term thinking is a vulnerability of psychopaths. They're not thinking about the possibility of losing. I mean, take, for example, Putin's first attempt to conquer Ukraine. He miscalculated. Didn't recognize the strength of the Ukrainian people, the capacity of the Ukrainian people to resist his efforts to take over Kiev. And that is an example of his vulnerability. Think about his relationship with Prigozhin, how much he failed to take into account the rise of Prigozhin as a threat to him. And ultimately, he had to kill him along with other senior people from Wagner. So, as I said, long-term, I don't believe Putin has a strategy other than to become the new czar of the Russian Empire. How he gets there is something that he decides on a short-term, almost daily basis.
Mr. Steer, also, we can talk about the paranoia because it can appear in Putin just in recent years. Remember when he kept his distance from his defense minister and from all political leaders, as we see like the president of France using those long tables. Now he's mostly hiding in his bunker. And Ukraine, we have a joke that Putin is a bunker grandpa who is stewing in his fears while hiding deep underground. Can paranoia be good news? Because at least it shows he's afraid of death. So here's the last chance that he will use nuclear weapons, for example. No?
No, I see it again. I see it a little bit differently. he's not paranoid in the sense that in a literal sense. Paranoia is generated by fear. As I said before, psychopaths do not feel fear like you and I feel it. It's not an emotion with them. Putin has done a calculation. The perceptions of psychopaths are not distorted in the same way that somebody who is psychotic, somebody who's schizophrenic or has bipolar disorder, have disordered perceptions of reality. The psychopath's perception of reality is absolutely clear, and in fact, better than most of us because it's not clouded by emotion. And so Putin assesses the situation and realizes that he's in great danger, not based on fear of that danger, but based on what he considers to be the reality of the situation. He knows that there are people, including perhaps dissident Russians, who would take the opportunity to kill him. And he doesn't know when a missile might happen to land on a building that he's in. And so, and he looks at other people through his own eyes and sees how ruthless he would be if he were on the other side. And he attributes those characteristics to the people that he is dealing with. And so that's why Putin takes the precautions that he does, because he's making rational decisions. Now, you raise the issue of nuclear weapons. I don't want the world to rely on my judgment about Putin and his willingness to use nuclear weapons. But if I'm correct about Putin, and Putin is in fact a psychopath, like the literally hundreds of people I've dealt with over the years, he is not going to be self-destructive. I mean, he might commit suicide, as Hitler did when he was trapped, but blowing up the world by starting a nuclear war is not something that a psychopath would typically do, because a psychopath would understand that he couldn't stop it. He wouldn't become the czar of the Russian Empire by blowing up the world. So I don't think that that's part of his thinking, starting a nuclear war. That's how I would bet. Now, in the past, I've had dealings with psychopaths where I had to take risks that they wouldn't do something, not blow up the world, but wouldn't do something very, very, very serious that I thought would be irrational. And in each case, I must say, I was very lucky to be correct in my assessment. There are limits to which psychopaths will go. And in the case of, you have to understand what their objectives are. And in the case of Putin, his objective is not to destroy Russia. It's to expand Russia and to become the czar. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have a fantasy that someday he'll take on that title.
Mr. Stee, you mentioned about Hitler. Is it right to compare Putin and Hitler? I heard different thoughts, and one of them that Putin is not Hitler because the Nazi leader believed in his perverted ideology. Putin doesn't believe in anything. He cares only about his comfort. Right now, he takes tactical decisions to try to save his face and to get at least some form of victory.
Ideology is just a device to a psychopath. Hitler was clearly a psychopath. And ideology was a device to try to unify the German people to support the Second World War. He was as shallow in his ideological convictions as Putin is. So I think that there are very close comparisons between Hitler and Putin. Now, that's not to say that all psychopaths use the same tactics to achieve their goals. Each psychopath has his own set of tactics. There are some psychopaths who do not physically harm other people. They'll manipulate other people. They'll exploit other people. They will take advantage of other people, but they won't do physical harm to them. There are other psychopaths who get satisfaction, gratification from causing physical harm. So you have to look at each psychopath as an individual and look at their history and catalog all of the tactics that they've used throughout their lives to achieve their goals. And then you understand what they're capable of. And that's what I did with every psychopath that I've ever dealt with. I've looked at them. I've understood what tactics they would use, and I have taken the risk that they won't expand the range of tactics that they use to achieve their goals. When you do that, then you can devise a strategy to deal with the psychopath. And that strategy cannot include accepting their word, accepting their commitments, or falling victim to their manipulation. It's the strategy to deal with a psychopath has got to be based on an understanding of what that psychopath is capable of, and then shutting down opportunities for the psychopath to use those tactics to his advantage.
Mr. C, I also heard one thought. If you put constant pressure on Putin, he's bound to make a mistake. Neuroscientist James Fallon said, quote, "There is no way a psychopath can win this war because the longer it goes on, the more Western weapons and technology are coming in and the more local support wanes, keeping the pressure on lengthens the amount of time and creates a gap for other players to come and say you can't do this, you can't do that." Do you agree with this?
Well, I don't know about other players stepping forward and say you can't do this or that, but I do agree that because a psychopath is not capable of long-term planning and strategic thinking, that intense pressure will cause the psychopath to make a mistake. Now, when that mistake is made, we have to be prepared to step in and take advantage of that mistake. And we have to be alert to those mistakes. Let me give you an example that I think is clearly what I'm talking about. In conducting his war against Ukraine, Putin focused on gaining territory in Ukraine, inch by inch, sacrificing his Russian troops, he failed to take into account the possibility that Ukraine might take Russian territory. So he left himself vulnerable. And quite, I think, brilliantly, Ukraine took advantage of that and took Russian territory, something that Putin never contemplated. It was a mistake. He should, I mean, a normal person, a normal leader would have taken that possibility into account in developing his plans for protecting Russia against a potential invasion by Ukraine. But Putin didn't do that. Mistake. And so Ukraine must be alert for other mistakes. He will make them inevitably. It's going to happen because I think whoever made that observation, that continuous long-term pressure is the best strategy to deal with a psychopath. You've got to continue the fight until the opportunity to defeat him becomes apparent, and that opportunity will come.
Mr. Steer, we're talking about Putin, about terrorists, and I hear now air alarm, so we have threat of missile strike, and it also conclusion again that Putin is a psychopath and terrorist, and Russia is a terrorist state. Mr. Steer, I thank you for your interesting thoughts. It was something new for me and for our audience. Thanks for supporting Ukraine. And guys, subscribe on our YouTube channel, like this video, and see you.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'd be more than happy to return anytime.
Thank you.
Good luck to the Ukrainian people.
Thank you.